Hello, Radiant Church. This is Dennis Fuqua, and I just want to share some thoughts with you about how we can pray in this time that could certainly be considered a crisis in some people's lives. And if it's not a crisis in our life, it may be a crisis in someone's life that we know. So I was thinking the other day about Jesus, and in fact, he is the one who faced the most significant crisis that anyone has ever faced in all of human history. And it's recorded in Luke chapter 22 when Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. Because you see, there's no question about the fact that our salvation was accomplished at the cross, but it was determined in the garden. Jesus didn't really want to proceed. He asked if there could be another plan somehow, and the Father answered him in a negative way. But here, let me just read these 4 verses. And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." 3 things that I want to offer to you, that as you pray during this time of crisis, learn from Jesus here in his time of crisis. The first of all, he said, as he came out, as was his custom. Jesus had a custom. Jesus had a usual. Jesus did something in a normal way over and over again. He had a place and a time where he prayed. I just want to ask you, do you have a place and a time where you have a custom of praying? Not necessarily a legalistic thing, in fact, not at all a legalistic thing, but is it your custom to pray regularly? I have what I call a prayer chair. And after I shower in the morning and figure out what day it is, then I come out and I sit in my prayer chair, and that's where I have time with the Lord on a regular basis. So if you don't have a custom of praying, that's the first place, because you know what? It's hard to develop a regular time of prayer in the midst of crisis if we don't have a regular time of prayer before that crisis. And then the second thing that I want to point out is what Jesus said to his disciples. He turned to them and he said, "Pray that you will not enter into temptation." He didn't say pray that you'll be okay through temptation. He said pray that you won't enter into temptation. There's a power to keep away from temptation that only is released in prayer. I want to encourage you to pray in some specific ways that you would not enter into temptation. 2 ways that I think of right here. You know, things could get much worse than what they are right now. And there's a tendency for us to fear. And you know that over and over again, it's been said 365 times in the scriptures, it says, don't fear, don't fear. Be courageous, be courageous. Turn away from fear and walk in peace. There is a temptation to let fear rule our lives rather than Jesus rule our lives. Pray that you would not enter into the temptation of fear. A second thing is that in regards to temptation is that it says in Philippians chapter 2 that we should consider other people more important than ourselves. Oh, isn't that a temptation? We are tempted to think that I am the most important person and I've got to take care of me. And the biblical way, the scriptural way, the heaven way is to look out for other people and even consider them more important than myself. It's a temptation to think that I'm the most important person. We need to pray against that temptation and pray that we would consider other people as important, if not more important, than ourselves. Then the third thing that I want to offer you is how Jesus prayed. He said, "Father, if there's any way possible, let's figure out another way to accomplish salvation." And then he said a very significant word. Then he said, "Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done." I want to suggest to you that word nevertheless is a hinge point of history. What would have been like if Jesus would have said, "Father, figure out another way to do this because I'm not going to go to the cross"? obviously everything would be different. I want to encourage you, and I'm taking this encouragement myself, to pray nevertheless. Tell God what you're after. Tell God what you want. Tell God, pray according to His will, but then include that word nevertheless and the phrase that comes after that, not my will, but your will be done. So I want to pray with us right now about these three things. Father, I want to ask that you would help us have a custom of prayer, have an as usual of prayer, that we would have a regular time, a regular place where we would go and pray before the crisis comes, so that in the midst of the crisis, we won't have to pray any differently. We'll just extend what we're already doing. And then, Father, I also want to pray that you would help us to pray against certain temptations. Specifically, God, help us to pray against the temptation of fear. Help us to pray against the temptation of being self-centered. God, that's your desire for us. And then I want to ask that you would help us to pray like Jesus did. God, here's what we want. Nevertheless, not my will. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. I want to suggest that as we pray in those three ways, we'll pray better in the midst of crisis.